嗨，大家好，我是 Irina。今天我们测试的是口语 Retail Lecture RL 在口语和听力当中的分数占比。我会把模考实录放在视频末尾，让大家看到实战答题。使用的还是 PTE 最新推出的2小时模考1卷，其他重要题型的分数测试可以看我这几个视频。首先注意，口语中我先用 RS 打底，然后再做 RL， 其他题目全部跳过。口语 RS 的分数测试可以看我这个视频。第二 ，RS 和 RL 都是给听力贡献分数的，这是我的测试成绩。口语卷面30分，听力卷面37分，减掉 RS 的部分，说明 RL 卷面给口语的贡献是5分，给听力的贡献是4分。换算成百分比，是占口语 5.5%， 占听力 4.4%， 并不是1%。大家会看到我的分数比较高，是因为这道题和我们之前说的 SST 要求一样。第一，抓到关键词才更得分，抓到核心的得分词汇要比任意写名词得的分数要高。第二，内容要多，内容叫你能写到多少关键词，写的越多分数越高。所以通过这个测试，给大家的建议就是，对于7炸以下的同学来说 ，RL 并不是一个重点题，保证模板使用的熟练度就可以了。但对于8炸同学来说，卷面的5分和4分都是不可以被忽略的分数。提高要以内容的精准度为主，尤其是练习听和抓关键词的能力，因为只有词汇准确才会拿到高分。嗨，大家好，我是 Irina。今天我们来测试口语 RL 在口语和听力当中的分数占比。我会先用 RS 来打底，之后再做 RL 的部分。RL 在上一次的完整模考当中，我已经做过一次笔记了。上一次的成绩是满分90分，所以这一次我会直接读上次的笔记。那我们开始吧。
What has happened in Latin America as a result of globalization? Well, they have had now more than a decade of what is called reform, a decade of globalization. And throughout the continent, people are asking questions like, has reform failed us? Has globalization failed us? Because clearly things have not worked out the way they were told they ought to. Just to give you a picture, they were told that reform would lead to faster economic growth. After a decade, what are the numbers? In fact, recent growth is far slower than it was in the 50s, 60s, and 70s before reform. That is not a very inspiring success story. Even in the beginning part of the 90s, growth was still below what it was in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but the growth it got in the beginning of the period was not sustainable. And it was not sustained. Throughout the region, poverty, as measured on the $2 a day standard as a percentage of the population, was actually up.
The lecture is about Latin America and globalization, and then the speaker talks about reform in a decade, and then the speaker talks about question of why it failed, because things have not worked out, and then the speaker talks about faster economic growth, and then the speaker talks about slower and below what it was, because the beginning was not sustainable and not sustained, so the poverty was actually up. In conclusion, the lecture is about Latin America economic growth 1960 to 2005, followed by period, followed by growth rate, followed by 1960 to 1980, followed by 82%, 9%, followed by 4%, followed by 2000 to 2005.
So let me begin with the notion of a dimension. The dimension is simply how many numbers that you need to specify a location. So if we think about the surface of the Earth, the equator is one-dimensional. You need to specify only one number to specify a location on the equator, namely the longitude. The surface of the Earth altogether is, of course, two-dimensional. You need to specify two numbers, the latitude and longitude, to specify a location on the Earth. The space above the Earth is three-dimensional. If I want to tell you the location of a hang glider, I need to give you the latitude, longitude, and altitude. But mathematically, there's no reason to stop at 3 dimensions. A 4-dimensional space is simply a space in which you need to specify 4 numbers to specify a location in that space. A 5-dimensional space would be one in which you need to specify 5 numbers, etc. In fact, I claim you already know an example of a 4-dimensional space. So let's define an event just to be an occurrence that happens in a small region of space at a definite time. In other words, an event is like a snap of your fingers or a clap of your hands. And now the collection of all events, if I want to specify an event, I need to give you 4 numbers. I need to tell you where it happens in space and when it happens in time.
The lecture is about notion of dimension, and then the speaker talks about numbers you need to specify a location. And then the speaker talks about the equator is one-dimensional, called longitude. And then the speaker talks about the surface of the earth is two-dimensional, which is called latitude and longitude. And then the speaker talks about the space is three-dimensional and includes altitude. And then the speaker talks about four-dimensional needs 4 numbers and 5-dimensional needs 5 numbers. And then the speaker talks about an event and occurrence. And then the speaker talks about where it happens in space and when it happens in time. In conclusion, the lecture is about dimension.